What's happening, Expeditioners? It's Pete, founder of Expedition Money, and I want to talk to you about something that I actually like a lot, and that's cars. And one of the things that I wanted to tell you is I don't think you should buy a $3,000 car. I don't think you should buy a super cheap car. And if you do, that's from Good Morning Vietnam, by the way. But if you do buy a $3,000 car, I'm going to tell you how I think you should do it. One of the things that you should know about me is that I am a car guy. I grew up in Detroit. My father worked for Chrysler when I was young and then got into financial planning when I was in grade school. And I knew a ton of families. A lot of my friends worked for the big three automakers. I grew up in the car culture. Man, people would drag race up and down Woodward. I loved cars, tried to work on them. I actually owned a car shop for a while. Customized cars. I've worked on my own cars. I have more cars than time at the moment, and I really love them. I just enjoy them. They're my hobby. They're my vice. It's one of those ways that I think men can feel like the process of giving birth. You're giving life to something in some ways, and they're also something that people can enjoy. They can see. You can share them with people. You can pass them down, and so that's really fun for me. I really love cars. So this comes from a place of love about cars. And basically, what I want to discuss here is that in the financial planning world, the personal finance world, a lot of people talk about, hey, you should sell that car, can't afford the payments, get out from under it, and then go buy yourself a cheap car. Sell that $20,000 car, you have a $20,000 loan on it, pay it off, take $3,000, buy a cheap car, use that as your transportation. And my issue with this is that it's easy to say, and mathematically it makes sense. And cars are more reliable now than they've ever been. But my issue with this is that a $3,000 car sucks. And it's not just it sucks. Oh, it's not luxurious. It doesn't have all the new amenities a car has. It doesn't have Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. I don't even care about that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. Leather seats or any of that. Even cargo space and size. That's not my issue. My issue with it is when cars get cheap, there's usually something wrong with them, and the cost of maintenance on them, the cost of repairing them and keeping them running is so much higher. In fact, part of a presentation that I did in years past was to just look at a bunch of different cars and the average repair costs versus the life and the mileage, right? Because we know that cars depreciate and they don't go to zero generally in price, but they fall precipitously and then they flatten out. Think of like a Jeep Wrangler. If you bought a Jeep Wrangler, it's like $30,000. If you buy a 10-year-old Jeep Wrangler, it's $15,000. If you buy a 40 or 50-year-old Jeep Wrangler, it's probably $3,000 or $4,000. So they just slide off here. Most cars are like that, but they all have different curves. The problem is there's another curve that goes like this. And so even though this kind of bows down, the cost of buying the car, the cost of maintaining that car goes up over time. And if you are going to drive it regularly, that cost can be very high. I have a 1979 Jaguar. It needs some work right now, runs rich. That's the problem with the fuel injectors and the ignition timing and all that stuff. It's just a situation where it's not something that you can just drop it off at Midas. In this case, I have to find someone who's familiar with the car, has worked on this car, as opposed to working on it to try to figure it out. There are a couple shops here in Chicago that specialize in Jaguars that I use, but then they're not cheap either, right? But if you had a car right now that was running rich, I have a Buick Encore. If that was running rich for some reason, maybe fuel pressure or something like that, they would probably swap out the fuel pressure regulator or the fuel pump or whatever it is. And you're talking about maybe $300, $400, $500, $800, maybe $800, maybe. You're talking about 90% less than what it's going to cost on my old car. And this is just a thing that happens on older cars or cars that get more finicky. With time, rubber dries out, plastic dries out, bushing in those materials, the gaskets, they're like this synthetic felt, right? All that stuff starts wearing away. Cars rust. The coolant starts leaking. Oil starts to get a little bit syrupy, right? There are just tons of bushings and gaskets and hoses and belts and things like this that just wear out over time, no matter how good you are about maintaining it. The thing I hate are timing belts over timing chains. Man, you could potentially never replace a timing chain, but you are going to have to replace an engine belt, and most modern engines are interference engines. We won't get into all that, but basically what I'm saying here is that I have sold cars too, modern cars, not cars that I wanted to hold on to, but modern cars. And the reason I've sold them is because they get to that point where I'm putting more money into it than I would want to. And the problem here is that if you're going to go out and you're going to look for a $3,000 car, you're going to go on Facebook Marketplace or Car Gurus or Auto Trader or wherever, and you're going to look at a $3,000 car, The reason that someone has listed a car for three or four, maybe you're starting at $4,000, right? Thinking you can negotiate them down to $3,000. The reason that they are listed at that is someone wants to just get rid of it. I don't care how old that car is, but someone has said, I will take $3,000 and just be done with this car. And it's probably because they've started up and they got an ABS warning at some point, or they got an anti-lock brake warning, or the evaporative system fires off a message, or the catalytic converters are giving out, and the O2 sensors are giving intermittent signals about running too rich, or whatever it might be. Maybe something that isn't completely consistent, but there is a reason that they are parting with it. Because in most cases, if you have a car paid off and it's not worth a lot, you'll just drive it. It's just transportation. At that point, it's not like that money's going to go into your pocket and make you wealthy or anything like that. And so most people get rid of cars because they are a pain. And my issue with this is that despite how long I have been involved in cars, and despite the fact that I'm pretty thorough about looking over cars, there are things that you just can't see. It doesn't matter what mechanic you take it to or how knowledgeable a person is. I just can't see a timing belt from inside. I can't necessarily measure clutch wear without doing something a little bit more invasive. I can't necessarily tell you if the linkages on the parking brake work or the parking brake works or whatever. Sometimes you'll see some of this in your inspection or your test drive, but the reality is, even when you take a car into a shop and you have an issue with it and they're futzing around with it, sometimes it takes them a while to figure out where that rattle's coming from or that shaking in the suspension or whatever it might be, right? So the problem is that if people who are knowledgeable about cars can sometimes be taken by people who are maybe less than honest, or to be honest, I hold nothing against someone who's unloading a car for cheap. There's just not that much you can expect from it. The reality is they're probably getting rid of it and they probably give it away. My guess is that if you buy a $3,000 car, you should expect to put a few $1,000s into it over the next year. That's just my guess. That you're going to get it and it's probably going to need oil change right away, probably belts, new spark plugs, maybe a fuel filter, air filters, all the normal stuff, wipers, all that jazz. Because also, if someone's going to sell something for next to nothing, let's call it a penance, so they're not going to put in a lot of maintenance into the car, right? They're not going to do the timing belt, which could be $1,500. They're not going to do the next oil change. They're not going to put on a new set of tires. They're not going to spend $500 or $600 or $700 on a $3,000 car. They're just going to let you deal with that next. So basically, it gets to a point where all of these things are getting stacked up. The person has probably thought about selling this car, and they know that they're just going to let these things, these needs pile up, and then they'll just dump the car on the open market and get whatever. Honestly, it might be listed for $4,000. You come, you say, I'll give you $1,500 in cash, and they'll be like, oh, yeah. And if you are an average person, you are getting through on life, and you're not even a big car person, car gal, car guy, how do you know? You could pay a couple $100 to have a mechanic take a look at it, and they're still not going to fully know. They could give you some heads ups on stuff that might be worrisome or kind of red flags on things, but you're going to go, you're going to test drive it. That person's going to make sure that it's the right time of the day so the paintwork looks decent, or the right roads, or that you're not off on the side of the road on a heavy incline where the engine oil is starved, or whatever it might be. So the issue to me is that $3,000 car is really a $6,000 car, okay? And it might be more. And the reality is that when we say, a lot of financial people say, hey, you buy a cheap car, you should just have basic transportation, A to B, that's all you need. They don't really talk about how much that's really going to cost you. And in fact, most of the talking heads out there are rich, millionaire rich, right? They don't drive a $3,000 car. They maybe never have bought a $3,000 car. I'll tell you, I was in college. I bought a Geo Tracker that was, I don't know how many years old at that time, $800, and that thing was a piece of junk. The seats wouldn't move. The passenger seat was like reclined in the vertical position, so people sitting in the side had to kind of lean forward. It was weird. It would never go back. The soft top on it was missing some windows, so you drove in the winter and you just had cold air coming in. $700, it ran. It was a manual too, so it was not going to appeal to a wide audience. And when things started going bad on it, like the headlights started getting a little shaky on the side, no one was going to fix that, right? Because this car was going to run until the engine went up in smoke, and then you were going to have someone tow it away for $50. So the reality is that those are the kind of cars that are for sale for $3,000. And especially in a strong used car market, which right now, 2023 is a strong used car market. There is nothing out there that I would buy for $3,000, really. Even at $8, $9, $10,000, I'm surprised at how limited and how poor the choices that are available. It's weird. I see cars with 140, 160, 170,000 miles for $8, $9, $10, $11,000. It's crazy. So part of this is the economy we're in. Part of this is limited inventory. There's a lot of things that go into this. But my issue is really, I would probably rather you go out, find the Nissan Versa, find the Chevy Sonic or whatever the new version of it is, Chevy Aveo, or these cars don't even exist anymore, but someone might have one on the lot, and find a car that's newer and lease it. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, leasing is fleecing. I'm just saying that what I would rather you have is a $200 predictable expense each month, knowing that car is going to get you from A to B, okay? So about 10 years ago, I rented a GMC Terrain, and I just went and I said, I'll take whatever Terrain you have on the lot. Doesn't have to be four-wheel drive. I don't care about the paint color. I don't want any features with it, but I'm trying to get a car for $200 down and $200 a month. Actually, $199. Said under $200. And we figured out a way to do it. It was a 28-month lease, $200 down, $200 a month, and that was it. That was my exposure totally to this car. And it didn't have a ton of miles, but it allowed me 12,000 miles a year. And the nice thing about it was new, and I didn't have to worry about repairs. If something was going to go wrong, it was going back to the dealership. 28 months, the whole time I had it, it was going to be under warranty, and I had that peace of mind. And it was a new car. So what I'm saying here is that I get it. $200 a month for a year is going to be $2,400, and you're saying, Pete, $2,400. I only have the car for a year versus $3,000. Could have the car forever. I'm just saying that $3,000 car, like I said, I really think is a $6,000 car. And so that $6,000 car is what you're going to pay to lease this GM. And then that $6,000 car is going to basically be worth nothing. It's going to go poof at some point. All right. So I am not a big fan of buying ultra cheap cars. They just tend to be expensive in the end. It's like when you go really cheap on something and you realize the qualities are there and you go end up buying the premium one anyway. I've done that plenty of times too. Listen, I'm not preaching here because I'm infallible on anything. For example, one time I remember, I love cars. I wanted to have a car repainted, and I've had cars repainted before at major body shops, and they're expensive. It's like $3,000, $4,000, depending on what you're going to have. And it was a Jeep Wrangler. It didn't need the best paint job in the world, but I found a guy on Craigslist, and he would repaint it in his garage for $800. Man, I thought, I tell you what, if I just ask him to do the best job he can, and he tells me it's $1,000, I'm still $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to the better on this thing. And I tell you what, instead of using a single stage paint, which he could have done, which is like the clear coat, the glossy finish in the paint and just spray it once, he used just the base paint, and that needs a clear coat on top to make it shiny. Otherwise, we call it sandpaper. It just looks like a matte finish. Now, this was long before matte finishes were in vogue, and this was not a good matte finish. So he painted it, and it looked terrible. I went and picked it up, and the reality is it just could not be salvaged, right? Because you only have a certain amount of time before that base layer cures, and you can't put clear coat on it because it's going to peel and all this stuff. So it had to be resanded down at a regular shop, repainted, clear coated. It looked fine when it was done, but I paid this guy $1,000 out of his garage, and I still paid someone $4,000 to do it. So it ended up costing me $5,000 to get a $4,000 job. That's what I'm kind of saying, is that we think we might be money hacking sometimes, but what we're really doing is we are just deferring the payment we're going to make later and costing ourselves more upfront. And that's what I think really $3,000 or less, you find that $1,500 car. Now, what I'm saying here is that you can find some gems for sure. And if you really know what you're looking for, something that's unloved, something that's unpopular, something that doesn't fit your climate, a two-wheel drive sports car in northern Canada, it's probably going to be pretty cheap. A minivan in Hawaii is probably going to be pretty expensive. It just depends, right? But here's what I wanted to say. If you have a $3,000 budget and you don't care about the car, here's how I would go ahead and buy a car if you wanted to buy a really cheap car. What I would do is I would go on Facebook, and hopefully you have a network there, or wherever you have your kind of network of friends, maybe it's LinkedIn, and I would put your story up there. Just be honest. Listen, I can't afford a good car right now. Things are really tight. I'm looking for the cheapest thing I can. I'm looking for reliable transportation, something that hopefully, no guarantees, but hopefully doesn't need work. I just need to be able to get to work and back or pick up the kids. I just am looking for something reliable. And stop there. Don't start putting in, I'd love capacity. I love something that uses E85 flex wheel. I would love something with leather seats if I could. Just the thing that I care about most is reliability. And when I say reliability, well, basically all I'm talking about is preventing ourselves from having to pay more money 2 weeks from now, a month from now, 3 months from now. All of the above, right? That's reliability. I don't care if actually the paint is flecking off or there's rust spots and those kinds of things, because that doesn't necessarily stop me from getting from point A to point B. And that's really what most of us need a car for, right? So what I would do is I'd put that story up there and just say, listen, and here's my budget, $3,000, maybe, if that's what it is, and see who responds back to you. Because I think your network of family and friends are going to be honest with you. And you might find that you have that aunt who had her Chrysler Concorde for the last 15 years and has put 10,000 miles on it or something like that. And someone is willing to sell you a car that they know in their heart is pretty reliable, is pretty decent, and they would give it up to you for your price, which might be honestly $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 under fair market value if they really wanted to milk it for every penny. And so what I would do in that case is then use that car, because that's where you want something that you know the history, right? Someone's going to stand by it. This isn't a stranger that is just never going to see you again. They're going to take your money and run. And again, this person does not have any obligation to you if the timing belt does break next week or next month or any of those types of things. But what I like about this strategy is that someone can feel good about themselves by selling you a car that they know has been pretty good to them, that they know they've maintained, maybe even have done some recent maintenance on it. They're doing you a favor by hooking you up at a price point that you can afford. And I think that is the only case where you would buy a $5,000 car for $3,000, because you're doing it within your network, that trusted network, your friends, your family. If you go out to the fair market and you go to Facebook Marketplace or Car Gurus or Auto Trader or Cars.com or any of these other places, and you buy a $3,000 car, you're probably buying a $1,500 car for $3,000. So the question is, do you want to buy a $1,500 car for $3,000, or do you want to buy a $5,000 car for $3,000? The answer is you want to buy a $5,000 car for $3,000. So that's why I'm saying don't buy a $3,000 car. You are probably not going to get scammed. It's just you are probably buying a car that somebody else is fed up with, and it's going to cost you money soon. And it might cost you a lot of money soon, or it might stop running soon. And you might end up wishing you had spent that $3,000 leasing a new car for a year. The other thing is, if you do have a decent network, if you have a local network, especially if you live in a community where there's a lot of people around you, if someone lives halfway across the country and is willing to help you out, that doesn't necessarily help you out a lot, right? You might have to fly somewhere and drive back or ship it. Sometimes those things eat up all the value there. But maybe you have a family member who you didn't know. They don't need their car anymore. They're looking to downsize. They swapped out for something else. They didn't want to trade it in because they were getting next to nothing. They feel better about this. It's not necessarily the car you'd like. It's a big land barge and you're something of a svelte supercar type of personality. Or it's a big purple SUV and you wanted that cute silver Miata, whatever it might be, right? It's not going to necessarily be the perfect personality fit for you. But what I think you're going to do is you're going to get more bang for your buck, and it's going to help out your budget, and it's going to be the reliable car that you're looking for. There's pretty much no other way I would buy a car at that low price point other than working your natural market. So hopefully that helps. Don't buy a $3,000 car. I know people say it all the time. I've done it. I've gotten burned, and I know cars. So that's it. Hopefully that helps. See you later.